Hi and welcome to Season 2 of Who Really Cares, a podcast brought to you by Carers in Bedfordshire. My name is Nikki and I'm your host on this podcast, and this is a podcast all about unpaid caring and the impact that it has on people's lives. And we share stories, share tips, and we talk to some very interesting guests. Today we have the most interesting guest I could possibly find. You are in for a real treat because today I am joined by Tanya Franks. Tanya is an exceptional actress, and you may know her well from EastEnders, where she played Rainie. She also has appeared on Broadchurch, Pulling, just to name a few. She's also very experienced in the theatre, appearing at the National Theatre not that long ago, and most recently in Stratford at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Today she's joining us to talk about her journey of caring for her stepfather Derek, who had Alzheimer's, and she cared for him for a long time. And not only does she have a lot to share about the process of caring, but this whole thing led to her making a massive change in her own life and educating herself and setting out on a journey to educate others. Tanya tells us about her own reasons for setting up her non-profit company Elimtia and what that means for her and for us as a whole, which is very, very exciting. So sit back and get a cup of tea. It's quite a long chat, but there's a lot to cover. So please enjoy this chat with Tanya Franks. Hi Tanya, thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Nikki. How are you?
I'm really good. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Just
thank
back
you
from a little run.
Oh, well, good.
Thank you.
I'm not just back from a little run, but that's fine. I will exercise later, I promise. Anyway, thank you for fitting me into your busy schedule. I know that you are very busy, so it's great to have you. And you've got an interesting story because you cared for your stepfather. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
for 11 years.
11 years? As long as that. And so
Yeah.
he had dementia, am I right? Or was it?
Yeah, Alzheimer's.
Yeah, Alzheimer's. And so you had to care for him from the point of diagnosis? Or?
From the point, yes, yeah. So at that point of diagnosis, he had already shown quite some signs of changes, and that was the reason that we then took him for a diagnosis, which he was quite willing to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you and your mum noticed changes in him. Is that why you kind of went for diagnosis?
Yes, yeah. There were behavioural changes, certain things, everyday things that he was getting confused about. And yeah.
And that was obvious straight away, or did it take you a while?
No, when we look back, we can actually see signs of, because with Alzheimer's, it does start 20 to 25 years before you can even get to the point of diagnosis. And usually by the time it gets to the point of diagnosis, it's too late. So when we look back, we can see that there were signs, certainly within those 20 years. But at the time, we didn't put it down to anything like Alzheimer's.
Was that just because you just weren't thinking along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely not. It was just just you're living your everyday, and the odd things happen here and there that are quite unusual. But as a family, myself and my mother and my stepfather, we would laugh about things when they happen, and they were they were sort of momentary things. And they weren't happening regularly, but they were quite outlandish at times when they did happen, and very un-Derek, if that makes sense. So, but it wasn't anything that was frequent enough that made you think there's a real problem here.
And so when it got to that point of diagnosis, obviously those instances had got closer together, or, just more noticeable?
Yeah, well, it was more noticeable because there were sort of what I would call smaller everyday things that were causing confusion, or noticing that he wasn't quite able to formulate sentences in quite the same way as he usually would, or just little things that at the time just seemed slightly out of character, more out of character and more often.
Yeah. And when you got the diagnosis, was a support plan put in place straight away, or how did that go for you? Because a lot of people find that moment quite sort of like a turning point in everybody's life.
There was no support plan put in place. Nobody helped us with a support plan, really.
Really?
Which is, with talking to other families that have gone through this, it seems that is largely lacking in this country. And they say to you to contact Alzheimer's Society. There might be local dementia groups that you can make contact with. There was one local group that my mum and my stepfather went to, and basically all it talked about pretty much was how devastating this disease was going to be and what to put in place regarding further down the line. And actually it was helpful from some point of view of recognizing certain things that would happen in time, but it certainly didn't help with the day-to-day support in any way, shape or form.
Okay. And so
nobody from the point of diagnosis, he was never called back for any tests to ever see how it was developing or progressing.
Really? No.
No, not once in 11 years. Not once in 11 years.
Oh my word! And so from the point of diagnosis, you're sort of just cast adrift,
yeah. Get on with it, live with it, and get on with it as a family.
And so what did you do? Like, what do you do?
So we researched as much as possible with the internet, particularly, which is when it kind of comes into its own in a lot of ways. It can also give you lots of nightmare scenarios.
Yeah.
And also, we very much made a decision very early on. We learnt as much as we could about the disease through talking to charities, various charities, and as much as we could, doctors, specialists in Alzheimer's, and we would seek them out to learn more about the disease. And we made a very conscious decision that we were going to take each moment at a time, one moment at a time. It was very important for me that I encouraged my mum to, of course, who was fearful of the future and what the future of the illness would bring. And my mum was going to be the dominant carer with him, of course, because she was the one living at home with him 24/7.
Yeah.
And I was also put down as a co-carer. However, I wasn't living with them. So I was a co-carer on the basis that I was, of course, still having to work and come and go. And I very much encouraged my mum to take away the pessimism of the future.
Yeah.
And live in the moment, because we know that every journey of dementia is very different for everybody. There are commonalities, there's no question about that, but because of different people's lifestyles, different people's circumstances, different people's experiences in life, and the way the illness is determined for each person, it's a different journey. And no two people are the same with dementia. So I really encouraged her to think about the fact that this is Derek, this is how his journey is going to be from now onwards. We don't know how much it's going to progress or not. It could be another illness that comes along and becomes more
Yeah, that's
prevalent
so true.
than the Alzheimer's and the dementia. So let's not focus on the pessimism of the future regarding Alzheimer's alone. Let's still enjoy the fact that this is Derek's journey in his life, and we live each moment to moment, each hour to hour, each day to day with him, still doing the same encouragement and love for someone as you do, and happiness with someone as you do at any other time.
It sounds, I mean, that I totally get that, and I think that's, such a great outlook. But how easy is that to do, to avoid the pessimism, to avoid the doom, on a day-to-day basis?
It was really about encouraging each other. We were very fortunate with Derek that he was. This is, and I must preface this by saying this is purely our story. This is purely my experience. Everybody who is diagnosed with this illness will take it differently, will handle it differently, and will feel differently. But there is a commonality where it feels like when you are told that, it feels like there's a sentence being put on you, if that makes sense, regarding health. And so, and I guess that is the case with many illnesses and diseases anyway. So I think the big fear, of course, is the stripping away of somebody with this. So not only most illnesses, somebody still manages to maintain their character and understanding and of themselves. Sadly, with this disease, it strips their own personality and their own understanding of what life is and their own existence. So that's the big factor in the future that you can't really determine until you get there, which is it. I think we were very fortunate with Derek, which is what I was about to say. We were very fortunate with him because he accepted the diagnosis from the outset. So his response was, well, something's going to get us. And that was, so that was his reaction to it. And so from that point of view, we kept it, we were able to be very practical about it and be very open and communicative about it.
With him or just...
With him and with each other. We were able to laugh. I mean, because the changes that happen are so many behavioural changes that suddenly become so different to how we are used to existing, that it seems like at times there are funny things that happen, and there really are, because they are out of the norm of that person. But we saw a lot of funny sides in things that would happen, and Derek himself would laugh,
Really? Oh, that's nice.
And I think it was the laughter and seeing the comedy in many of the circumstances that got us through, because if we hadn't had that optimism in the moment, everything would have been very doom and gloom. But we had a lot of recognizing that things were different, things were changing, and we would laugh together about it, and that made a huge difference in being able to handle it.
And as it progresses, though, obviously it becomes less funny, I'm imagining. Because
it does. In the latter stages, there is a lot less humour. When somebody gets to the point of not being able to understand their own existence, and when things become complicated, when somebody doesn't understand why or how, or what does it mean to stand up or sit down, or when somebody doesn't understand what that means, when you're, when you're saying we need to stand up for this, Derek. What's that? How do you mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's not funny.
How do I do that?
Yeah.
That's not funny.
No,
that's not. Nothing but disastrous.
And you can't find anything positive in that.
No, there's zero positivity in that. However, I was very conscious of the fact that I remained very conscious of the fact, and again, Mum and I would speak about this. I remained very conscious of the fact that no matter what somebody's journey is, I've made a commitment to help that person through their journey. And if I sit here and constantly feel sad about what is happening to this person, then actually I'm missing the moment of this person and missing the connectivity. As little as it may become, there is still a connectivity, because you've made a pact with yourself to help this person through their journey, whatever that journey means. And so therefore, in that unconditionality, I just made a pact. I'm not going to go to the future. I'm not going to look to the end result. I'm going to live literally. If there's anything that taught me about living in the now, it's that disease of Alzheimer's.
Wow. Well, that's a positive.
Because it changes from second to second, moment to moment, minute to minute.
Wow.
You know, what seems like there's a glimmer of understanding at one moment, in the next minute, there will be no understanding of it whatsoever. So you have to change course. You have to improvise constantly. And you cannot keep somebody in our world. What is our reality is not their reality anymore. So you have to go with their reality. And who's to say that this reality of the confines that we give ourselves on a day-to-day basis is right or wrong? Their reality becomes different.
Yeah.
And
very real to them.
So therefore, one must go into their reality, because although it's different from yours, you're never going to get them back into your reality.
No.
It's a one-way ticket.
Yeah.
It's a one-way journey.
Yeah.
And that's it. So you can't fight that.
And how did you work it with like support network? Because obviously you talk a lot about your mum, and I'm sure you were a great support for her, and likewise for you. But did you have a wider support network? Neighbours
and show caring and asking about us. But at time, there were a couple of friends that were very good with Derek. They would come and, spend time with him, or take us out, or take Mum and Derek out for lunch or whatever, that sort of thing, and would be very patient with Derek, beautifully so. And so that was lovely, when you see the patience of other people with somebody that is going through that. We had, I think it was through the Alzheimer's Society, there was that, I think they have a friends set up, and somebody used to come to the house to do sort of regular visits. I think it was once every couple of weeks or so, or you could call on them more if you wanted to. She had been through the journey herself with her husband. She was actually a little bit older. She was an older lady, but she'd been through the journey with her husband. So she would come and be somebody who would sit and talk with Mum and Derek and spend time with them. And she would pop in, have a cup of tea, and sometimes she would bring round, a little plant or whatever. It was lovely. And she actually became a very nice friend to them and has remained so.
Wow.
So that was lovely, because it came out of that. And then eventually, of course, we had to start bringing professional carers into the home after some hospital admissions. It was becoming apparent that he absolutely needed care, professional care. And so we started having carers coming into the home. And then, of course, it became unsafe for him to stay at home, both for him and for Mum. So it was at that point where we had to make the decision of it being a care home. And we never actually had that conversation with Derek, because he was in hospital, and we insisted that he goes to a care home straight from the hospital and not from home, because I think it's much harder to have somebody leave the home as one experiences it to be, to then have to go somewhere that will become another home. We were able to, we always had the conversation. His understanding, his comprehension of what home was not becoming familiar to him now anyway. You know, he couldn't remember, you know, he didn't know the layout of the house. He didn't quite understand what the concept of home was anymore now anyway. However, when we were in the hospital, we went straight to the care home after an admission to hospital, and we just would say to him, he would say, you know, where are we now? And we would say, this is an extension of care, of the care we were getting in the hospital, and they need you to be here so that they can continue to give you the care that you require, as they were in the hospital.
Was that a particularly hard decision, or was it a natural progression, like it was obvious?
It was an obvious choice, because it was becoming physically impossible to deal with Derek at home, even just because we couldn't afford to have somebody 24/7 carers, and in the home, but also the layout of the house doesn't facilitate it.
Right.
So therefore there wasn't, it's a different need. It was becoming physically impossible to move Derek in a way that was safe for him. He needed 2 or 3, sometimes 4 human beings to help him to move at any one time. And that might not have been all the time in the day, but certainly in chunks of the day. So, and you never knew when that was going to happen. So it was impossible for Mum to be there on her own with him. She was getting about, you know, as it was coming to later stages, she was getting about 2 hours sleep a night, because she was up with him. And, she was 80 herself at the time. You know, it becomes an impossibility. For somebody to deal with that. I couldn't be there all the time still, because I was having to maintain contracts of work that unless I gave up the whole of my career to do that, which neither Mum or Derek wanted me to do. And, you know, how would we financially survive? If we all did that, then we can't financially survive. So we had to find, and we couldn't have done it anyway. I could have given up my career, and Mum and I still wouldn't have been the physical support that Derek needed. He needed to have a group of people with him. It had to happen. But it was an extremely hard decision. And actually, probably the hardest part of it was how it affected Mum, because, of course, it meant Mum then living in the house on her own 24/7, rather than him being there. And of course, her whole world that she'd known for the last 40 years changed.
And so
overnight.
How did she cope? Was that like a grieving process for her?
Yeah. There definitely, with Alzheimer's and dementia, I think, you know, there are various stages of grief, and some, you know, there is the grieving. If there's almost like 3, 4, 5 different stages of grieving actually with Alzheimer's. It's when you get the diagnosis. It's when you start seeing somebody losing their personality. You're grieving. You're looking at them and you're grieving what isn't there anymore. When you can't even communicate on the same level anymore because they don't understand what it is to be themselves. You grieve when they go into a care home, if it gets to that point, and you grieve when they pass.
Yeah. It's just
it's a constant state of
grief.
Of long grief. And that was why I made a commitment to myself that I was not going to grieve Derek at any point. I literally would say, I would recognize moments of sadness with him, and I would literally say to myself, this is sad for you, this is sad for you, Tanya. It may not be for my stepfather in the same way. So you know what? You are here for now with him. Don't grieve him until he's actually gone. He's not gone. He's physically still with me here.
So were you able to do that?
Living the now with him. I was able to do that, yeah. I was able to do that. I made a very conscious decision to do that. And and of course it comes crashing down when you then do lose them.
I was going to say, does that make it worse when he did actually pass then?
Do you know what? Grief is very different for everybody, and you can't equate what grief is for. Every relationship is different for every human being, so you can't ever equate how grief is going to be for somebody. What it does do is there is a preparation to that point. You know it's going to happen, and you do. And as sometimes you question feeling this, and for some people, I hope people forgive me for saying this when I say it, but it is my honest thoughts and feelings at the time. Was there you think why would you please take this away for Derek? Because why? Why have them? Why does nature allow somebody? Why does it strip everything of that human being to allow them to be nothing?
So
what's the point? What's the point of them still being here, still being alive at that point, with so much difficulty for them that they can't even understand, and it is nothing but trauma for them. It becomes a constant trauma. So what's the point of that constant trauma? Surely we don't let our animals go through that.
Yeah.
Why is it okay to let a human being go through that? And yet that's very much becomes also a selfish view from my point of view. It's my perception of me being on the outside caring for him. It's my care. I want to put him out of his misery. One wants to allow somebody to be out of their misery. On saying that, Derek was very much a believer of life is not for ours to take. And whatever life determines, one sees it through to nature's very own end.
Right.
And so therefore, my feelings actually don't correlate with how Derek felt for himself, and which is, that's, and so again, as I say, forgive me for how I felt at times, because sometimes I would say I feel terrible for feeling this, but I don't want him to be going through this trauma.
So if you had the chance to end it for him, would you have taken that?
No, because it's not what because it's
said.
Not what he. It's not. Yeah. It wasn't his belief. And
so when he did pass, did you feel a feeling of relief then? Had it got to the point where, this is enough now, enough?
There is a feeling. Yes, there is a feeling of relief, because it's not the same sadness. In a way that you recognise now this is really the very end, and that you grieve for your loss. But I did not grieve, and I do not grieve for Derek's passing, for himself, because his body, I knew, Mum and I could see, we were with him right to the very end, and there was no life left. The only thing that there was to go was his breathing. That was the only thing, the heartbeat and his breathing. Once that equipment stopped, that's all there was left. So I don't grieve for his passing, because, as Derek said, we've all got to go somehow. And we tend to have a fear of that in this part of the world. It's not the same in every part of the world.
No.
In this part of the world, we have a fear of that. It's allowed me to have less of a fear of that in some ways. It's allowed me to recognize that for myself, my views now is that we are a piece of equipment. It is made up of extraordinary energies, and however, we are a big piece, we are a small piece of a very big universe, and the atoms that we are made up of and the equipment that our bodies are equip us to exist. But once that equipment starts to pack up, and in this case it starts with the brain, it's where it's the way it's going to go. It's the way it's going to go.
Yeah, I mean that's a nice insight, and I can see how that experience would lead to those thoughts. And my next question is then, so what do you do with that? So what do you do with that that insight? Because you mentioned that you've just come back from a little run. And is that because you're like, okay, I need to look after myself. I want to look after my equipment.
Very much so.
Which leads me on to asking you about the charity you set up, because that's also about looking after the equipment. So is that where it all came from? So
when Derek was diagnosed, after a few years of, seeing the decline happening and the progression of the disease, I sat down one day and I just thought, we don't have a cure for this. So what can we do to prevent it happening in the first place? We very much live in a reactive society. Wait for something to happen and then we react. So how actually do we prevent it? We do know, now that we can prevent certain cancers by certain lifestyle choices. It doesn't ever mean that you won't ever develop cancer. It won't ever mean that you don't ever develop dementia. However, if we give ourselves the very best chance, we can live our best life on a day-to-day basis, knowing in the knowledge that we are giving ourselves, within our own choices, our best chance. And so one day I sat down and I just thought, okay, I need to go back. What is the very starting point of this? And actually it became apparent to me that it was about how we choose to live. What is it? How we choose to help our own brain health. And so therefore I started a non-profit company called Elimtia. And I called it Elimtia because it comes from the point of view of eliminating dementia. Can we eliminate dementia through prevention?
What are they saying? Can we?
Yeah, can we? And what we do know is that we can cut down new cases of dementia by up to 45% by the lifestyle choices that we make.
That's incredible. Why don't I know that statistic already?
Because at the moment, it's not being put out there on a very common basis. The knowledge, the education is not out there. And it's being drip fed in, but you know, I went through an experience where I wanted to learn more.
Yeah.
Because of the experience that I was having with somebody that I love. So therefore, I wanted to learn more, and because I don't want other families to go through what we went through.
Yeah.
You know, and Derek was wonderful in his support of that, actually, because, you know, I said to him, listen, I'm thinking of setting up this non-profit company. I want to call it Elimtia. It's about eliminating dementia through prevention and seeing where that is possible. And he said, do it. He said to me, I mean, this was when he still had comprehension,
Yeah.
you know, and he said to me, if this has come out of this journey, then it's worth it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I said, well, do you mind if I speak about what we're going through? And he said, no, talk about me as much as you like. I don't mind, you know, and he's since been up on, you know, we've had his photo has been up on television interviews and all kinds of things, you know.
Yeah.
But it wasn't about him. By the time I was talking about it publicly, he didn't even recognise that he'd been up on a television screen. He didn't even understand what a television was by the time, I was doing some of those things. But he did recognise that I ran the marathon for him. And, you know, that was wonderful because he did understand what I was doing at that point. By the time I was running my third marathon, he wasn't quite so comprehensive with it, but certainly the first one.
It's nice to see such positive outcomes, you know, from something so, you know, horrific, really.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something I really admire about you, that you are able to take something like that and go, okay, well, but let's do something. Let's do something, you know. And you've done lots of things, because you mentioned the marathon, and you were running that in support of Alzheimer's.
We ran that. I was raising support for Alzheimer's Research UK.
Yeah,
that's who I dominantly support as an Alzheimer's charity, and the reason that I support them particularly is because they are very much towards the research of Alzheimer's, finding, yes, a cure, but also promoting prevention. And they very much align with my thoughts and my feelings.
So just going back to what you said about the 45% downturn, if we do these right things, what do we do? What do we need to do then? What are the things that we should be doing?
So, you know, there is the thing of, I know we bleat on about it, and we do talk about it all the time now, which is a great thing, and that is nutrition, the food we eat, and that's a big part, a massive part of our health, and not just our health, but our brain health. And what we put into our body, what people don't realise, and this is something that I've learned because of this journey that I've gone through with Derek, I had no idea of the fact that the brain is in complete correlation with our gut. So, and we now talk about the gut microbiome. I had no concept of what the gut microbiome was until the last 2 or 3 years, perhaps. And the correlation between that, I mean, some people call the gut the second brain.
Yeah.
But what happens in our gut affects our brain. What we put into our stomachs affects our brain. And the relationship between the two is tantamount. So if we are putting junk into our gut, and our gut, it's telling our brain to fight the gut. The gut is sending messages. Oh, this is going, and the brain's going, yeah, this is terrible. We need to try, and the brain is constantly then fighting. The brain is fighting its own body. It's fighting the body. It's having to constantly be in stress to rectify the body. And there comes to a point where the brain, and this is getting very technical, but I'll say it very quickly.
It's good.
I'll say it very, very quickly. There is a wonderful book that I read that was a real insight. It's a very sort of scientific book. It may not be to everybody's taste, but I did get a wonderful insight. It's called Angel and the Assassin, and we have in our brain things called microglia, and microglia help the brain to preserve itself. So if it's building stress and compounds in the brain that need to be rectified, to put it simply, it will eat away at the inflammation. The inflammation builds up in the brain, and the microglia eats away the inflammation to rectify, to bring it back to health. However, if the brain is not quite working as it should, and the communications are not working as they should in the brain itself between the neurons and the synapses, then therefore the microglia won't know to stop eating the inflammation. It will keep eating. And so therefore will start to eat good compounds of the brain rather than just the inflammation. And that's where it becomes a breakdown. The brain begins to break down. That's one tiny little area that I've started to understand, and even the way I've expressed it, I can't say to you that I've scientifically put it across in a way that is 100% scientifically
correct,
linguistic.
Right.
However, it's what I'm saying is the communications between in the brain, what happens in the brain between the synapses and the neurons go to pot. There we build plaques in the brain, which can happen as a natural process of aging, and these are amyloid plaques, beta amyloid plaques. They form in the brain, and the brain has a capacity to be able to sweep out those plaques, to be able to, like you sweep out the dust from a room, it sweeps out the debris. If the brain stops being able to do that, the plaques build.
Right.
And therefore the brain starts to it develops holes. The brain begins to develop holes. And when you see a brain, which I have done, I've since spoken to professors, and I've been and filmed with scientists on this now, and they've shown me the different, what is a healthy brain and what is a brain with Alzheimer's. There are holes in the brain, absolute holes in the brain that form, and once that happens, of course,
and so you're saying
it's going to break down.
The gut has a massive impact on that, because it has
the gut has a massive exactly, because the gut what we put into our gut can overstress the brain, and so therefore the brain begins to fight, is fighting all the time with the body, and also messages get cross-wired because it's not being given a healthy message. So therefore it will also start to send unhealthy messages back to the gut, and so the body begins to break down. And exercise is another thing, and I mean, one of the things that is great for good brain health is table tennis.
Yes,
Table tennis is great for brain health because it's great hand-eye coordination. So therefore, the coordination between the body, the eyes, the brain, it has to work quickly.
I heard that it applies to all racket sports. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's I think that is true, and I think the speed of table tennis, because it's speedy,
right?
Your brain has to work quickly. But however, and the other, but also things like I just went out for a run. Yes, I went out for a run. What that does is it, of course, it's heart health is also linked with brain health. So what is good for the heart, they say, is good for the brain, and that is absolutely true too. So vascular dementia, for example, happens in the same way as you get cardiovascular disease. So it's the vessels clog. In vascular disease, in vascular dementia, the vessels clog. So in the brain.
Yeah.
So all these things correlate. The more we can look after our bodies and our brains intertwined with giving ourselves the very best chance. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we're definitely going to 100% not get, but what it does do is it gives you your very best chance.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that perhaps I can live a long life, even at some point, if at some point I should develop dementia, I would like to think that it will be a long way off and perhaps at the very, very last point of my life rather than too early. And however, for many people, we do have early onset dementia, and a lot of people go through that. And that can happen as early as, there are young people with dementia in their 20s.
Yeah.
You can't, if you have the gene. So there is some people have a gene. It is the minority of cases that people have the gene that links to Alzheimer's. It's the APOE4 gene. If you have that gene, it means that you are genetically predisposed to developing Alzheimer's. However, if one looks after one's brain health and one's lifestyle, one can still stave it off. It's still not definite that you will develop Alzheimer's.
That's incredible. So that means that it really is very much lifestyle, like a lot of physical diseases, lifestyle dependent.
Yeah. And so therefore, all these things are, and things like reading. What I didn't realise, I knew reading to be a very useful skill as a human being. It's useful for our education. It's useful for our entertainment. That's what I understood it to be. I've since found out that it's also very useful for our brain health. Reading fiction is wonderful for our brain health. Anything that you don't know. So if you're reading something about something where your brain has to create, it's working hard to put pieces together. So in learning something new, so when people turn around and say it's too late for me to learn the piano, it's never too late. It's never too late. Our neurons and synapses in our brains keep building and growing into our 90s. They keep going. They keep building. And if we keep those energized, we are giving our brains the best chance of survival. And so to learn any new skills, if it be table tennis, if it be tennis, if it be piano, if it be a new language, all of using your non-dominant hand
really
is also a great challenge for your brain. So because we spend the whole of our lives doing what we know.
It's funny because
it's getting the brain to start doing things that it doesn't know.
Yeah.
That's when you're exercising the brain.
I don't know whether it's the way I was brought up or our society in general, but all those things that you're mentioning, so things like reading and learning the piano, they've always been, in my mind, like a luxury, like a hobby that it's nice to do because it's fun and nice, but actually, there's lots more important things to do before you do those things, and they're a kind of reward, maybe. But actually, the way you're talking about it is that they're essential, and you should be doing those, even though they're fun.
Absolutely, and what a wonderful thing that they are fun and keeping you healthy at the same time.
Yeah,
isn't that a wonderful way to approach life? The things that we can learn and enjoy, actually, by continuing to learn them in new fashions, is also keeping us the healthiest we can be. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
The amazing natural foods that we have, that we have been brainwashed into thinking that we have to buy convenience foods.
Yeah,
in this modern era,
a processed version of a natural food.
And therefore, that's become it's become commercialized. It's become a commodity, and it's become monetized.
Oh, completely.
Where actually, for people that do have the opportunity to grow natural food. I don't have, I don't have an allotment. I don't have a garden where I have room enough to be able to grow fruits and vegetables and things like that. A lot of people do have that possibility. It's the most wonderful possibility to be able to do that. I search out for the most natural foods that I can within the confines of my existence.
But I mean,
if we keep that attitude of keeping it as natural as possible, where we can enjoy our nature.
It's funny because I despair sometimes about some of the things that you come across in the supermarket, and I look at the like snacks and things, and they're often highly processed, added sugar. It's like a pear that has been mulched up and processed into a little windy thing that the kids can unwrap and wind. Why not just eat the pear?
Yeah, eat the pear. Go and buy a pear.
Go and buy a pear. You don't need to buy...
When my mum was growing up, my mum used to eat a cucumber walking along the street. Like if my nan bought cucumber for, in the grocers, my mum would eat it walking along the street like a bar of chocolate.
Yeah.
Or an ice cream. My mum, that was in her as a child. That was natural to her to do that. She's very fortunate that she has a taste for natural foods. However, a lot of people that have not been brought up in a way where to satisfy your taste buds with natural foods, and have been brought up on processed foods or sugars, therefore need to look at what they're eating and be given the education to make a choice, to say, actually, I can retrain my habits, I can retrain my taste buds. Given time, I can learn to think in a new way regarding how I eat. And it takes time. And it also takes commitment. However, it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful education to be able to turn around and say, actually, I want to give myself the best shot. Yeah. And so therefore, the more we learn on that, the better. It's all, in my opinion, Elimtia is, as my non-profit company, Elimtia, is about educating. So it's about reaching people and saying, look, if I can give you the opportunity to open up the education of how we can help our brains, it's up to you whether you want to take that on or to, experience it. However, if we're not educated, we don't even know we have the choice. Yeah. So all I want to do is pass that word around, and by doing that, hopefully we can give more and more people, particularly younger people, because, Alzheimer's and dementia can start as early as in many cases, your 30s, because it takes 20 to 25 years before the point of diagnosis. So, it can start at a much younger age than we even realise. So therefore, the earlier you start thinking about looking after your brain health, it's going to help the health of your body generally, and your attitude for life.
That's amazing. And what I really like about this whole thing is that it came from Derek himself, this whole thing. And I think what I you talk about legacy and everything, but it's about finding the positivity and the opportunity and the ways you can take what you've learnt and turn it into something positive, and you've managed to do that.
Yes.
So
exactly.
I applaud you 100%. Now I've got to ask you some questions, because I always ask them, and I should do that. Some of them might apply to you, some of them might not, but I always ask, how was your caring day yesterday? Now, you are a former carer, so that still applies to you, because, you're also still supporting your mum.
I'm still supporting my mum, and I still, my mum's now 80. Well, she was 83 just last week. So, yes, I still support my mum. And although caring is not at the same demands as it was 6 months ago for Derek, it's Sorry, that's my.
What was that? Your
that's my phone alerting me.
Was that your
I've got a
mum?
message. Yeah. It was just but yes, I still have my antennae out, of course, for looking out for my mum, and I spend as much time as I can with her, and obviously I check in with her mostly every day. I have the odd day in between where I might miss, but mostly every day I check in with her and just see that she's okay. Does she need anything?
Yeah.
Of course, going through grief is a big thing, which is obviously we're only 6 months down the line here.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of readjustment. And she has her own health issues. So, we're doing what we can to live with those and deal with those,
And second question, what do you wish you had have known at the start of all of this? I guess that means at the point of diagnosis.
I wish I'd known at the very start, not immediately jump to the end. Immediately what you do is you go to the point of how it's all going to be horrible, or, because you immediately start to look out for those signs. It was an 11-year journey, and although there was progression, there was still quite a number of years where we still had, still a wonderful life with him, and he was still able to live a wonderful life. Changes happened, definitely, and we had to adapt, but not to immediately go to the point of misery.
Yeah.
Because we still had, many, many, many wonderful years of, the real miserable times didn't start until the very latter stages.
Right.
And I would honestly say, in the last I would say the last 3 years or so was really when it started to kick in. But that's a nice 7 or 8 years where we were still able to do lots together. Things became more difficult, but we were still able to do lots together. And for some people, you can have Alzheimer's or dementia for 20 years plus. So
don't jump to the
end. Jump to the end, and don't always be looking at where the end is, because live day to day, live very much day to day, moment to moment, and day to day. And I think that becomes actually a lesson for actually everything in life.
Yeah, and that's another positive to take away. If you've managed to do that, then that's something that you can definitely carry forward, because there's benefits in that all year round. And third question, if you were the boss of everything, what would you change to make things better for carers?
So I can obviously only speak from the experience of an Alzheimer's journey. However, of course, every other illness and disease that requires carers are as demanding in many ways. So I would say that from an Alzheimer's point of view, what would be wonderful is that the doctors would check in with you like they do with other illnesses and diseases. They don't check in with you. You're given the diagnosis and you're just sent home. And what would be nice is if they checked the development so that they could, so that there was a journey for carers, that the medical practitioners recognise that the carers need caring for, because the strain and the stress and the physical and mental impact on carers is huge. And when the medical profession just send you home with a diagnosis of something and they don't check in to see how the carers, as well as the person that's living with the illness and the disease, when they just, they let you muddle through And until you go, and you go to them and you say, because it can affect your sleep, it can affect your diet, it can affect your physical capability. Stress is a massive problem in health.
Yeah.
There are good stresses. Yes, there are good stresses that we go through. And actually, there are the demands sometimes of being a carer. The focus becomes quite almost defining. And so, therefore, there is a thing where actually the role it gives you at times gives you an energy at times. However, when it becomes very constant, the constant stress of it has to be managed. And I really would like to see society starting to check in on carers and how they are.
Yeah. I should mention that you live out of Bedfordshire, otherwise we would have helped you loads. But
I know you would have done. We didn't have a support system like you, and that is amazing.
Yeah, no, because I'm listening to all of this, and I'm thinking that we do chicken, we do. I hear them on the phones, phoning people up, saying,
it's very, very worthwhile, and carers need help. Carers need help as much as the person that is going through what the disease or the illness that they're living with.
Yeah.
It is the carers also need help.
And, otherwise they end up part of the system as well. That's what we say.
Exactly, because then they become ill. And exactly. I literally, the healthcare system, there were times where I literally would say to, the healthcare system, health practitioners and the health system regarding things like when you're in a care home, not the care homes themselves. In most cases, they are doing the very best they can do. But, the healthcare around it, so continuing healthcare, NHS continuing healthcare, things like that. I literally used to turn around the social workers that were put in place and all that sort of thing. I literally used to say to them, if you're not careful, you won't just be having to look after Derek, you will also be looking after my mum. Because actually you are not doing anything to help or relieve the stress that by the questions, the constant denial of the existence of his illness of Alzheimer's, like that this isn't a disease, that this is, that this is what just happens with old age. No, it doesn't. It's an illness. And therefore it has to be recognised as such. And if you don't recognise that, the denial of what somebody needs is as stressful. And that stress can also lead to illness within the carers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Well, that will probably be your next battle, seeing as you're a doer and a fixer. Well, none of us will have Alzheimer's if we do what you say at Elimtia.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Let's hope so. That's the whole point. Let's hope so.
I'm so pleased that something positive has come out of your journey with Derek, and it takes people like you to affect change. So, thank you.
Well, let's hope we can at least cut down 45% of new cases.
That would be nice. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with me.
Oh, thank you for asking me, Nikki.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure
to be able to talk about it like this.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, then please do like and subscribe and share this podcast with your friends, and we can bring you more of them in the future. Once again, my name is Nikki, and this podcast, Who Really Cares, is brought to you by Carers in Bedfordshire.